Thank you so much for being on the programme today. Firstly, if I may get your reaction to the shooting of the Slovakian Prime Minister.
Well, really shocked, of course. I mean, this is a European country, the Prime Minister being shot at, I understand, several times and in a serious condition as we speak. Thoughts go to his family, first and foremost, but also, of course, to the Slovakian nation as well. This will be very shocking all round, and we wish him a speedy recovery.
I know it's very early days and you're probably limited in what you can say to us, but do you have any update at all on the motivations, perhaps, of the attacker or the condition of the Prime Minister at all?
None whatsoever at this stage. I am in touch with my Slovakian counterpart, the defence minister, but it's early days and the picture is unclear at this stage. So there's nothing I can add other than our thoughts and prayers are with him and with his family.
Do you think this is a bit of a reminder about the dangers, I guess, of being a politician, of going out, of meeting the public and effectively, being on the front line?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think it's worth saying that in the United Kingdom, we fortunately live in a society where guns are not commonplace. We have sadly seen some deaths of members of Parliament, and we mourn them. But it is a very, very unusual occurrence here. And there's only, in fact, ever been a single prime minister assassinated in the UK in all our years. Not having guns as prevalent is a very important part of that. But also it is true to say that I think the tone of politics is very important, and making sure that arguments are done in the right way in the House of Commons on programmes like yours, but not in a manner that leads to people responding by thinking that violence is ever the answer.
Do you worry that that is happening, effectively?
In the United Kingdom, no. I mean, I think that given the conflicts in the world, both what we see in Europe and, of course, what's happened in the Middle East, indeed the very large protests that have taken place, actually, we do need to remember that those have been without loss of life, which is very important in this country. But we have to be vigilant because the risks of these things spiraling are always there. And that's one of the reasons why we think it's very important to, in many cases, deal with issues, at source. It's one of the reasons why we have a large and active military, and the largest military spending in Europe is the UK, not least because that means that we can, oftentimes around the world, stop problems from getting to us in advance of things escalating. But of course, that's not the only answer. We have great security services and great policing by and large. And, our culture is not to have large numbers of guns in society, and all of those things are helpful.
I know, as you said at the beginning, there's little that you can add because it is a very early situation. It's a live situation. But when did you first find out that the shooting had happened?
Literally as everybody else did. In fact, one of the features of working in the Ministry of Defence is that we work without phones and devices most of the time for security reasons. We just can't have them on us in order to have the conversations at the level required at secret and beyond. And so I don't routinely see, for example, a Sky News alert in time to see it particularly quickly. But somebody came into my office and informed me directly. We're, of course, in touch with the government in Slovakia, and I'm in touch with my opposite number, largely at this stage sending our good wishes and, of course, offering any assistance.
OK. The other story that I really want to talk to you about today is Ukraine, because things are looking, I believe, quite concerning there. Russia making advances, President Zelensky having to cancel trips abroad. How worried are you about the situation in Ukraine? And do you have any fears that because of the other conflicts that we've been seeing, Ukraine's almost at risk of being forgotten?
Well, I think that's exactly what happened. I mean, not in the UK, I should say, where the British public and this government have absolutely backed Ukraine to the hilt. We've, this year, increased our financing to Ukraine and then added another £500 million to it, so £3 billion in military aid this year. We've done it consistently. And I literally went to Kyiv earlier in the year, and I warned that this sort of attention deficit from civilized countries was in danger of enabling a situation such as the one that we're seeing now in Kharkiv from developing. And so we actually predicted this to some extent. To answer the exact question, no, I don't think that Russia is about to enter Kharkiv. The lines are certainly being tested by Putin, but fortunately, that package, particularly the one from Congress, is now just starting to come to the front line. And that does mean that over the period coming, our Ukrainian friends will be able to resist this better than before. But I really hope that this is the wake-up call that we've tried to issue now being heard, which is this is not a war in which you can afford to be fully attentive and then switch off, or maybe get distracted into a different conflict and then expect nothing to change on the ground. Our brave Ukrainian friends are fighting with everything they've got, not least a lot of British kit, against this illegal invasion. We must back them all the time, not just periodically, and that I think is the big lesson of what's happening currently in Kharkiv.
You talked about an attention deficit from some civilized countries. Who are you talking about?
Well, look, and clearly, I think that the United Kingdom has led the way. I mean, the Ukrainians, President Zelensky, my opposite number, who I spoke to a couple of days ago, Minister Umarov, tell me this.
But my question is, who should be doing more?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, the UK leads the way on this, and what we want to see is all countries be as consistent and persistent as the UK has in its support for Ukraine. It has never wavered. We've only ever increased what we're giving them. Clearly, the package in the United States took too long to get through Congress. I mean, it is obviously the case, and for all sorts of reasons of internal politics. But here's the key thing. It's not just in Ukraine's interest, or indeed Europe's interest, for Putin not to win. It's directly in America's interest, because their authority would be challenged if that were to happen. And by the way, it's not going to happen, but if it were, their authority, not just here in Europe and with Putin, but with any other autocrat who thinks it's okay to walk into a neighboring country. And maybe if you just stick around for long enough, draw out the war a couple of years, then the West will give up, even though it said it wouldn't. It is essential that Putin does not win and cannot win. And we're going to make sure that happens, and we're going to redouble our efforts to make sure the whole world appreciates that's the case, because this is an existential risk to the civilized world.
You talk about the UK commitment to Ukraine that you're clearly very proud of. Another country that we are also sending arms to is Israel. Can you guarantee that weapons, made or funded by Britain won't be used against civilians in Rafah?
So I just absolutely need to correct this. As the British Defence Minister, I've just sent an enormous package, actually the biggest package yet, to Ukraine of gifted kit, government to government. We don't send anything government to government to Israel at all, in military terms, nothing. Any agreements, which are tiny, by the way, are first of all, have to go through a licensing process, which is probably the world's toughest. What's an agreement?
Process. You say an agreement. I genuinely, because I'll be completely honest with you. I spoke to Tom Tugendhat on the programme about this the other day, and I'm really not actually clear what the UK involvement is when it comes to weapons in Israel. I just don't understand. What is it?
So we don't send anything as a government to Israel at all, whereas to Ukraine we send a lot. So that's the first thing to correct, because I think somehow this conversation, not this one particularly, but generally protest and discussion around this makes it sound like we do send things. So apart from the government, aside from the government, let me answer your point. I explained. Yeah. The British government doesn't send anything. The defence industry is at liberty to export arms. However, in the case of Israel, there are very, very few defence pieces of equipment which are sent to Israel at all. In fact,
the bottom line, isn't it? Weapons made in Britain do go to Israel, don't they? Can you guarantee that weapons made in Britain are not going to be used in these kind of offences?
Right. So again, this is to mischaracterise. The entire arms exports to Israel was minuscule last year before
It could be
Hamas.
tiny. It could be tiny, but I'm just asking you a straight question.
I'm trying to
not
answer it,
asking
but
about the
actually,
size of it
every time I
or
nearly get there, you sort of cut me off. Let me just say these two things. First of all, almost nothing is exported. Secondly, everything that is exported is done so under a very, very strict licensing regime, which will mean that, for example, you're probably looking at defensive equipment, for example, is the likelihood. So we don't sell them in any case arms that are offensive in nature. And because of the tough licensing process in place, we couldn't do anything. We legally cannot sell anything which would go against international humanitarian law. Plus, and this is really the key point, the UK government doesn't give them or sell them anything directly when it comes to arms. So the entire debate about this has occupied a ton of airtime and actually is one of the most misled, misguided debates I've ever heard, because unlike Ukraine, we don't send them weapons.
OK, Grant Shapps, Defence Secretary, thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.